All right, welcome everyone today, where we're going to unpack AI in young minds and really think about risks, possibilities, and impacts together. So, as we unpack this, we're going to go for a range of content, which is really going to draw upon both your lived experience for those of you who are working with young people in the AI space, but also based upon best practice knowledge. But we all acknowledge this is an evolving space, and what we know today might change tomorrow. So we really would love your nuances to come out through the conversation. I've given you a brief overview of what we're going to cover. I would invite each and every one of us now to bring a mindful awareness of the importance of meeting the lands of the First Nations people right here, right now. Thank you so much. That's our personal acknowledgement of country, and LBI, we really invite supporting adults and practitioners to really bring mindful awareness to everything they do. And when it comes to the AI space, it is definitely a key principle we're going to bring you back to. The ability for both us as supporting adults and young people to be aware of everything we're doing, the reason why, and the intent. Screen capturing is not permitted, but there will be a video recording, and I've let you guys know how we're going to manage that information. So both David and myself are delivering today's session. Unfortunately, Jess is not able to join us. She's got some health stuff that she's dealing with today. I'll quickly introduce who LBI is, then I'll work to introduce the content. So at LBI, we are a not-for-profit really dedicated to empowering people and communities to thrive. And our approach is based upon the Impact program, where we are lead developers, deliverers, and distributors of the Impact program. And this program is really about building capacity to grow thriving people and communities. The Impact program offers a shared knowledge, tools, and practices to really build sustainable outcomes across three key levels: children, young people, and adults around these sorts of outcomes, from wellbeing, resilience, self-awareness. Supporting adults, teachers, caregivers, practitioners, how to be intentional and trauma-informed in practice, how to respond, not react, how to be neuro-affirming, and ultimately across schools, programs, and systems, offering that common approach by which we can navigate complexity together. In terms of this content today, or this session, this is what we're going to cover. I'll give you a very brief overview and talk about how we're going to do it. We're going to unpack AI. We're going to think about how young people engage with AI. We look at risk and opportunities. We're going to work to understand how it interfaces with yourself as a supporting adult. We'll then give you some really practical tools and strategies, looking at both literacy, critical thinking, as well as broader emotional regulation. And then we're going to leave you with some key principles to take away. In terms of the flow, so you know how we're going to navigate today's session, we're going to spend about 20 minutes looking at context, covering AI, youth brain development, neurodivergence, and trauma. We'll work towards risk and possibility, looking at learning, connections, help seeking. And then we're going to work towards managing risk and growing capacity across all these three layers, and then also work towards some final summary principles that we invite you guys to help us co-design as we get towards the end. In terms of the process, how we're going to deliver this, we are going to work towards giving you some evidence-based content, but we all acknowledge this is a rapidly evolving space. We want you to be really active in the group chat. We'll be doing some polling. We'll invite some local voices, and there'll be lots of reflective questions to really pull apart the nuances of this content. All right, I'm going to set the context. I'm going to be sitting here for probably about 15 or so minutes, just introducing what AI is, youth development, and that's going to springboard us into risk and possibilities. So to kick it off, I would like us to do a starting poll, and here is an opportunity for you guys to come in and to share some of your reflections and thoughts. So how we explore AI. So can everyone have a look at this poll and answer these questions? To what degree have you intentionally used an AI platform? And what's your confidence level in using AI? And how confident are you in navigating the risks and possibilities for young people? All right, so I'm going to share the results. So what we can see here through this initial poll is that to what degree are people using AI? Well, a small percentage, not at all. That's 21%, occasionally for about half the group. And then there's a smaller group of people using it very regularly or to a moderate to high degree as well. So there's a different levels of application across the group. What's your confidence level? Well, again, confidence is probably at the lower range of the spectrum there. You can see that some people are very confident, but most people lack confidence or only somewhat confident. In terms of how we navigate risk and possibilities, most people are at the lower end of the spectrum. So we're looking at the median or that sort of middle point probably being about 2 or 3 there. So David, I'm just going to give you an opportunity to make a comment by anything that you're seeing through that before I move on to the next point.
Oh, look, Ivan, I think this is really consistent with what we're seeing across broader populations. Some people are experimenting in this place. A lot of people are just starting to connect with it. So I think that that's really reflected in what we're seeing in the poll results.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to stop the share now and keep moving on. This is just a starting point. We are going to revisit one of those questions at the end of today's session. So just to, we'll bring you back to a key question that you can reflect upon to see whether or not there's been any growth and confidence through today's presentation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work to really unpack what is AI. Very quickly, this is not going to be that the technical speak, this is going to be shared knowledge, because what we are going to say today, the foundation of us supporting young people is we need to understand what AI is and what the core lingo is as well. We need to get a really good handle on this because ultimately we need to work with young people to understand this and both risk and possibilities. So let's unpack what is AI, and then we're going to go into youth development from there. At the end of this section, in about 10 or so minutes' time, we're going to give you this reflective question that we really want you to think about. Why might the risks and possibilities for an AI future be elevated for young people with a context of trauma and or neurodiversity? So risks and possibilities are elevated for young people with a context of trauma and neurodiversity. So what we're saying is if we're supporting young people with higher needs, there's both greater risk, but also greater possibility. And we're going to start thinking about the why in a moment. So let's unpack what is AI. I'll do this fairly quickly. And again, I'm not an IT expert, but I've done a fair bit of shared learning over the last 6 months. And this is sort of the summary content I'll give you here. So artificial intelligence really refers to computer systems that can perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. They don't think like humans, but they can process huge amounts of information very quickly and recognize patterns that help them make decisions or provide useful outputs. So AI is really computer-based thinking. Generative AI is the process of machine learning to create new digital content, such as text, images, audio, and multimodal simulations of experiences. If you're using ChatGPT, you're using generative AI. What are some of the key terms we need to consider? If you're using ChatGPT, you'd be aware of prompting. This is the instructions, the questions that you give to the AI system, and we know that good prompts get better outcomes. But AI draws upon what we call training data. That means the material that it learns in order to be able to give an output. And this training data could be books, articles, websites, conversations. So if you're working with an AI platform, that AI platform could actually be training from you. Your interface actually becomes the training data. It is important because the quality of the data affects the quality of the AI outputs, including any biases and inaccuracies. So we know that AI is not foolproof. And it's really important for us to consider that there is bias. So AI can reflect or amplify biases that exist within the training data. And it can also reinforce dominant worldviews. So if you don't provide the proper prompts, you actually might get the dominant or middle point position on an idea. AI also can hallucinate, that it comes up with information that sounds correct, but it's made up. And we really need to be thinking about safety guardrails and content filters, because this is how AI can use in a manner which reduces the risk for harmful or explicit or dangerous content to be accessed by young people. Definitely bias, definitely hallucination needs to be key ideas that yourself as supporting adults really need to understand, because this is the content that we need to support young people to understand as well. All right, where is AI found? Well, AI is found everywhere. So here's a diagram, and this diagram was developed in ChatGPT and based upon some prompts that I gave. And I want you to see if you can actually see some mistakes. So in this, as it comes through. So AI is used in social media, chatbots, gaming, education, creativity, just digital services, banking, security, mental health and wellbeing, in the news cycle, smart devices, home technology. So if you've looked at it quite quickly, you can actually see AI in smart devices is a mistake that it's made based upon content I've given it. So it's actually made up or given us false content. So when doing this presentation, I also wanted to go, I didn't really want to have a portrait-based image. I asked AI to give me a landscape image. So I asked AI to change this image to the one on the right, which meant that AI or ChatGPT actually had to rearrange content. And here you can see hallucination. So I want you to have a look at where hallucination is. You can see AI chatbots or companions, which is sort of, the social aspect of AI, is talking about Canva. Canva has got nothing to do with chatbots. That's a creative content suite. Virtual gaming. Canva, TikToks, Adobe Express isn't gaming. So you can see how AI has actually hallucinated here just by asking to have a different image size. So again, this is a really key content for all of us to understand. It can make mistakes, and we have to work with young people to understand how this occurs too. So let's do a touch point to ask the question, how are young people interfacing with artificial intelligence? And I'm going to put through another poll. So this is your opportunity for you guys to bring some reflection. How are you seeing young people access or use AI across all the different media? AI is being reflected upon across our group for young people we're supporting. From face value, we can definitely see that young people in social media, AI is embedded within social media, and ChatGPT is obviously high there. And obviously school and education is also quite high. Depending on the age of your young person, there might be more prominent, less prominent. David, do you want to make a comment from what you're seeing there at all? Or any other comments from the group chat as I've been talking?
Yeah, Ivan, look, I think what this does reflect is that it's really the school education sector that has picked this up at an institutional structural level, probably more so than any other area. What I know from my work with schools is that, pretty much every educator is using AI tools to support assessment and checking of work. And of course, students are using it to support their learning as well. So I think that's really no surprise there that that's the highest score. But of course, all those other areas that we would be expecting to see it, ChatGPT, gaming, social media, these are big numbers as well. So it really confirms what we do know about sort of what's happening in the community at the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, David. So, you've really highlighted the education has definitely really activated AI across all of its systems, and it's going to become more and more prominent across other systems as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start thinking about youth development. We're going to talk about youth development, brain development, neurodiversity, and trauma really, really quickly. And then we're going to leave you with the question, how might risk and possibilities be elevated in both directions for young people with a context of neurodiversity and or trauma? So at LBI, we really think about young people in a personalised manner, but we really think about the importance of working in shared intent. It takes a village to raise a child. In our approach, we invite supporting adults, and we bring a lot of focus around this to take a very personalised or what, how lens. What, how is our key framework. That first question really invites us to consider what's happening. What are we observing? What's the factors which help us understand this, or the context, historical and current, and what is under the surface? One of the biggest current contextual factors in the world at the moment is AI. So all of us are living in a context of AI being really dominant, and it's going to change a lot of things. And we're not really sure where the landing point is going to finally into, and there might be some overstated outcomes which do or don't occur. But we're going to really think about some of these key pieces today, especially under the surface. One of the key considerations is brain development, and we know that the brain develops neurosequentially or bottom up. In other words, the red part of the brain, those physiological reactions, are the first to really start developing all the way to abstract thinking, that top part of the brain, or what we might call the frontal lobe. This is really important because AI does require critical reasoning to really understand it and to use it well. And we know that critical reasoning or abstract thinking doesn't come fully on board until early adulthood. So the way to think about this is like this. We think about a young person's brain. They've got that sort of higher level functioning or the frontal lobe, but we know it's like young people still have spongy breaks. In other words, they don't always, stop, think, reflect upon what they're doing. And young people's brain is a bit like a V8 engine, a lot of raw to go, but there's a spongy braking system. So this is really important for us. AI does require us to use metacognitive thinking skills to be able to use it well. That is a frontal lobe task that does not come online fully until 23 for females, 25 for males, but obviously it's scaffolded up to that point. So we still have to work alongside young people in their journey to be able to critically apply and use it. AI also gets us to think about what's under the surface for young people, and in impact, we really consider the iceberg model behavior. And we know that many young people become obsessed with online activity, and we're asking the question, why? What is under the surface? And we think about these factors: feelings, needs, awareness, skills, mindset. So we know that young people, this is all young people, have vulnerable self-esteem. At this point in time, there's a real need for connection, belonging, and identity. They sometimes lack awareness of the impact of being online. They struggle to regulate impulses. And their mindset might be, if I disconnect, I might miss out or be excluded. So we know that young people are at a more vulnerable developmental period around these factors. So now we're going to consider trauma element to this, and then we're going to invite you to consider how risks and possibilities may be magnified. So just some really key quick content. Trauma is any event which overwhelms your coping ability, often linked to the absence of emotional and physical safety, often linked to also negative emotions and or helplessness. So trauma is an experience which overwhelms coping ability. Many of the young people that you're supporting have a context of developmental trauma, repeated trauma of a complex nature, meaning happening across multiple domains of functioning, that impacts on a young person's emotional, cognitive, physical, social, and identity development. It's having a pervasive impact. So we're going to bring a lens today of developmental trauma and how we might consider that within the AI world. We also need to consider what is neurodivergence. We've recently delivered a session on neurodiversity and neurodivergence. So this is really some key messages we want to leave you with to really think about this before we move forward into the AI space. So neurodivergence, or being neurodivergent, is a non-medical term that characterizes an individual whose brain works in a different manner compared to a typical or neurotypical individual. So it's functioning slightly differently. So neurotypical are individuals who are seen to have a majority brain. They process and understand the world in a way that's considered typical within societal norms. And these differences, or being neurodivergent, can be on a non-linear spectrum. Some might be very apparent, some might be very undetectable. So there's so much nuance in this space. If we think about neurodivergence, here are some of the foundational diagnoses which fall under the neurodivergence umbrella. And we can see autism, ADHD, intellectual disabilities, etc. So we know that many of the young people you're supporting have a context of neurodiversity. which means that their brain is functioning in a different manner compared to the typical or neurotypical brain. A key idea that we leave people with is that neurodiversity shouldn't be seen through a deficit model. We talk about having a spiky developmental profile. So you can see here a picture of lots of different domains of functioning. For example, emotional regulation or recognition, maths, sensory processing, etc. The neurotypical person has the red sort of functioning, meaning they're sort of, they're functioning that way, but the neurodivergent has a spiky profile. They might have great strengths in some domains and may have weaknesses in other domains. In other words, it's never a sort of set way of functioning, and different young people from a different neurodivergent profile or sort of background may have completely different spiky profiles. In other words, we need to meet every young person from the unique starting point and take both a strength and a growth perspective to their understanding. So if we think about development, and this is bringing together the previous content as well as new content on trauma and neurodiversity, we can see that the growth of a young person's development, linking to those bottom parts of the brain, is really about building safety and trust, self-awareness of body, how to connect body and feelings, how to ground yourself. That's the foundation for consequential thinking, self-expression, considering the needs of others, how to form relationships, to do goal setting, and ultimately identity. This is so foundational because we know many young people with backgrounds of neurodiversity and trauma, they regress back to their bottom part of their brain, which means they may become more stuck here. And this is important for us to consider because definitely AI is inviting consequential thinking, higher order planning, identity. And it may mean that young people with these contexts don't have the developmental building blocks to really navigate it. They may become more impulse driven or emotionally driven. So it means their building blocks can look a little bit like this. They may have great strengths, but not have the building blocks to navigate both risks and possibilities. So this might mean if we see a young person with context of trauma or neurodiversity, that they're going to have higher levels of more vulnerable self-esteem. And we know that shame is very much linked to a context of trauma, and also rejection sensitivity is linked to both trauma and neurodivergence. There might be an unmet need for connection. So there's a desperate need for connection, but have much higher control needs how that manifests. They might lack awareness of what's real versus fantasy or what's safe versus unsafe. They might struggle to really regulate their impulses, might come back to a more fixated or control-based place. And they may have a feeling, they go, I just don't want to lose this. So they become very fixated on what's going on and they're wanting to take control of their internal world. And AI may actually give them experiences which can be really, really, giving them a dopamine hit that can be highly, highly addictive for them. So let's bring all of this together. This is where we want to bring the group chat into focus. We want you to really think about this key question here. Why might the risks and the possibilities for an AI future be elevated for young people with a context of trauma and neurodivergence? And I'm going to invite David to come through and just sort of make a starting comment around what you're thinking and then allow you to summarize some of the flavor of the conversation as well.
Thanks, Ivan. Look, just before we get onto this, there are a couple of points that people made about where they have been seeing AI applied and possibly hallucination happening. So certainly the school space is a really big space. We've acknowledged that. But also seeing AI being used as an interviewing tool as well. And sometimes that's happening in a way that interviewees aren't aware of, but also in the court system and legal cases where there have been numerous examples of hallucinations happening. As we shift to the question at hand, risks and possibilities, I think Corinna made a really good point when she highlighted the fact that for young people who are neurodiverse, being online, engaging online can reduce the sense of trauma because it's reducing their sense of difference. And I think that that's really an important point that might kick off a number of comments on this question.
Look, I'll just make a quick comment based upon that while you analyse some of the comments coming through. Look, there's a very famous case where a really big multinational consulting firm used AI to write a report for the government, a $400,000 contract report, and had held and referenced a whole lot of case law which was made up by AI. It was all fictitious. So, we're starting to see this come into play, even in really, really big ticket ways, how hallucinations is being misapplied. So, from what I'm seeing across the space, and I think that's a good point really made, is that young people with neurodiversity and or trauma often do have high connection needs, and they are seeking connection. And for some young people, they are finding connection through AI companions and chatbots. Now, we can question whether that's a risk or a possibility, but we're going to talk today, it can be both, because it potentially can reduce risk for them to seek connection in unsafer ways, but it also has the potential to provide an immediate feeling state which can feel validated in that moment. And as the commenter came out before, I think it might have been Catherine, it can definitely help young people feel normal because they're involved in a societal place or a societal space, which every other young people is also accessing. So, David, do you want to draw upon some other things that you're seeing or reading from the group chat?
Yeah, look, we're getting a real mix of commentary on certainly risks for young people who are neurodiverse, where there may, or who are developmentally not up with their peers. There may be just questions as to their ability to assess what's accurate, what's true. But of course, the reverse is true as well. For those young people who might be struggling, whether it's because the young people are autistic or whatever it might be, that this is a space where they can engage. They don't need to have the same pressures to perform socially. They don't have the same pressures in terms of reading social cues. So there's a real sense that the pressure is reduced for young people in this space as well. There's lots and lots of new comments coming through. So I'll continue to try and work through these and feedback input from that, Ivan.
We're about to unpack risk and possibilities in a more granular way. This is just starting the conversation. So people are looking at AI through a sort of a non-judgmental lens and just being open to both possibilities. Just as a quick comment this week, I was at a school this week supporting a team, and there's a 20-year-old young person at that school. This is an alternative education school who is very, very socially isolated. Their family is so dysfunctional. There's no what I would call frontal lobe adults in their space who can give them good perspective. And they're going through so much change. And we spoke to the school about, could a very teacher-coached interface with AI be useful, because this young person goes down into really, really negative rabbit holes around what's happening, and it's just needing perspective and doesn't have any adults in their world apart from educators in their world to help them do that. And we started to think about that, so that the risk of them being alone in their complexity or their neurodivergence, their words, TISM, that's how they referred it as a young person, then their TISM, is the benefits of them having an alternative platform to help them deconstruct what's going on in their head. Is that that's a potentially a good outcome for that young person, especially if they have no social capital or frontal lobe adults in their world. So I'm going to keep moving forward unless there's any other comments, see if anyone wants to come through. You're not expected to come through. We've got a fair bit of content to go through. But there's just an opportunity for us to allow some of the diversity or nuances to be shared. So I think what I might do for time's sake, keep moving forward, and I'll let you, David, come through the next one to sort of give us a little bit more perspective on it. All right, so we're now going to unpack both risk and possibilities across three domains. We're going to look at learning and growth, which is really education. We're going to look at social connections, and then we're going to look at problem solving, which also touches on mental health and well-being. So we're going to be thinking about these three domains, and from there, we're then going to work towards a sort of a where do we go forward sort of an approach. In the background, this is what we're going to unpack in probably about 7 or 8 minutes time. So I'll just get you to review this, because we're going to use this as a case example to unpack some of the nuance. So Cody has a learning disability and has always struggled with maths. It's better when his teacher is around, but it's really hard when it comes to his maths homework. His solution is to plug his maths homework into Question AI, and it gives him multiple ways to address the problem. He doesn't try to cheat by getting the answer. He just needs help to understand the right steps. What are the risks and possibilities for Cody and or for other young people you support? So we're going to reflect upon this, and I'm just going to give you some content to help us scaffold some of the thinking here. All right. So we're really talking about the educational space at the moment. We're really thinking about AI in education. And there is a Australian framework for AI or generative AI in schools. I'm not going to go through all the elements of this, but to say to you, the school system is really grappling with this in a very fast, dynamic manner. I am a parent of two boys. I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old. My 20-year-old went through high school, nothing to do with AI. My 16-year-old, everything is AI. He gets an assignment in year 10. How can AI help me? So in the space of 4 years, this is the sort of the approach that you see. And now my 20-year-old who's at uni starting to think about how I can catch up my younger brother who's actually ahead of the game. So this space is moving really fast, and education is really at the forefront of this. And there's some frameworks around this as well. So where does AI pop up? Well, we can see it in classroom teaching. And some of this is a little bit aspirational. What do we mean by that? Well, it's not fully being applied, but these points are really to highlight where it's going to head. It's really going to promote personalized instruction, differentiation. Teachers are using it in lesson planning, assessment, supporting dyslexia, reading support, alternative communication for young people with disabilities. So classroom teachers are heavily drawing upon AI. It's starting to be increasingly used in social emotional learning. So how we teach young people conversational skills, social emotional learning outcomes, social support, self-regulation. And this is being linked to things like conversational agents or companions, role plays, peers or virtual peers, gamification of competencies, check-ins, etc. And we also know that students are heavily using AI as well around their reading, writing, research. And as I said, my 16-year-old, when there's an assessment, he's using AI to really scaffold the thinking. And these days, teachers and educators are having to create assessment tasks which don't allow AI to be the dominant output for that assessment. So let's think about the real possibilities here. Now, I've summarized them here. We'll then look at risks, and then we'll get you guys to think about it in terms of our case study and more broadly. There are great possibilities around AI now and the future around personalized learning, meeting every student at the unique starting point, including meeting their learning preferences and stage of growth and development, and able to track their progress and outcomes. So personalized learning will become a much more bigger focus moving forward. It's also going to reduce educator workload, and there is a real strong conversation that it's going to improve educator quality. In other words, I'll say this really diplomatically, but average teachers will become better because it's taking up a lot of the work required around planning, marketing, and it's actually giving teachers access to higher level teaching resources at their fingertips. It can build motivation and engagement of young people by personalization, by meeting every young person their starting point, which means that sort of naming and shaming around them, being different to their peers may well be reduced. It's really building accessibility and inclusion. So it really enables young people who have got neurodiversity or disability to have more targeted personalized learning, including really supporting adaptive scaffolds or steps for a student. And last but not least, it offers a very impersonal but more intensive feedback process. So it's impersonal, meaning you haven't got a teacher giving feedback, but it gives much more frequent feedback, which can then reduce factors around shaming, being spotlighted in the classroom. If a young person is sort of rejection sensitive or triggered by sort of being put out on the spot, this will be reduced. Also provide a lot high levels of validation around learning. Now, the validation is computer generated. It may not necessarily be adult generated, but it can provide a feedback loop, which may actually mean that young people can sit in spaces where they're not having as much, lowered self-esteem or not having their competency needs met as easily. Here are some of the possibilities. Let's look at the risk. There are a great number of risks, and I'm sure you guys can, really come up with these in your own mind as well. Definitely bias. It can really misidentify student needs and stereotypes. It can then disadvantage minorities and may not be culturally responsive or gender affirming, because it's sort of looking at the whole, or the training data is really about the general population. It may not actually see the nuances around that. And it may just in that way just really reinforce dominant worldviews. So there is a real risk we start moving towards a less nuanced culture. It has the ability to potentially inhibit metacognitive thinking, meaning AI is taking some of the planning, problem solving out of the equation. It's sort of scaffolding, how do I do stuff? That's a metacognitive thinking process, which means that AI might start taking some of this away, which can then lead to reductions in agencies and self-regulation, meaning young people or students are continually looking for external sources for feedback or outsiders or a platform to scaffold them. They're not able to sit in uncertainty as long. There might be reduced interactions with teachers, so reduced connection. It may mean that young people become more extrinsically focused. In other words, they're seeking constant feedback loops as opposed to being driven in their learning around intrinsic factors, enjoying the process of learning, self-discovery, becoming curious. So in other words, we may have a group of young people who are more extrinsically focused in the world. Surveillance. AI does mean that young people's progress can be surveilled, and they might have feelings of being watched. It also might mean that social emotional skills they're learning through the AI world become overly scripted and not very generalizable. And last but not least, learning can also be inhibited. So we know that, young people are using AI in a cut and paste way. That really raises questions around plagiarism. Are they actually learning the content they need to learn in order to scaffold their future growth? And definitely schools and universities are really grappling with assessment tools to make them less AI susceptible. So here are some of the really key risks and possibilities. In a moment, we're going to go to our case study and invite you guys to consider others as well. But in the meantime, I'm just going to bring up our poll to see whether or not you guys want to make a comment to which ones you see as the really key ones from your space. So I've just launched this poll here and get you guys to really think about two key possibilities and two key risks. I prefer you not to give us, tick every box, although you would be allowed to do that. See if you can bring some of the big risk and possibilities as a part of your reflection here. And then I'll invite a conversation by David to have a look at this. And if you want to uplift any comments you're seeing in the group chat, Dave, that'd be great when I bring you back in a moment. I'm going to paraphrase some of the results here and that allow you to come through, David, in terms of your comments in terms of this, but also any other comments from the group chat. So we're definitely seeing that people are seeing AI is about meeting young people around their learning preferences and potential, scaffolding around neurodiversity, etc. I think AI is going to have a big impact on how young people with neurodiversity are taught and supported within schools. I really suspect that this is going to lead to some big innovations. What are some of the key risks? Well, people have really seen the key risks is that we're not teaching young people the thinking skills for resilience and problem solving. AI is doing the heavy lifting around problems. And there's some other points there too. David, I'll get you to sort of make a comment from what you're seeing or bring anything from the group conversation.
Yeah, Ivan, look, I think probably what we were seeing through the chat was there's probably at this stage more emphasis on the risks that people are identifying than the strong possibilities. So there was a real sense that that there is a risk for young people that they're not able to check information, that there might be bias that's coming through, that they might be open to coercion or extortion because of their use of AI tools, that they don't necessarily have the capabilities to determine or discern what's real or what's not, and that this can impede their real world skills as well. So there was a sense that it could potentially be inhibiting young people's development as well. Of course, particularly when it came to learning, there were some really strong possibilities identified as well. In terms of some of the things that came up through the poll, it really confirmed those that the capacity to translate and interpret information for young people who might struggle with their learning is seen as a really, really important possibility, um, and supporting particular areas of learning. Now, I think one of the things that came through from the poll, which I suspect we'll talk more about over the next couple of sections, is just strengthening the capacity for inclusion, that young people who might struggle in that area, with a low sense of inclusion or belonging, that's going to be really, really important. So there's sort of some of the ideas that were starting to come through, and I suspect we'll build on those in the next two sections.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. And I've seen some really great comments coming through there, including Jody, you've made one in terms of the how young people have released information into a public platform. And then that's, now sort of being released more publicly as well. So there are some great examples of risk around information sharing. I think we're going to pull this one up a little bit more in terms of the next one around connection, because that's going to often there's a lot more intimate sort of conversations with young people and an outside source. But I do think personally, this is my personal view, I think education is going to be quite revolutionized by AI. So we're going to, we're going to see a big change. And I think there was a comment I read here, which again, the comment would be, it could also leads to sort of haves and have-nots around AI, meaning if you understand how to use AI well, then you can actually get more from it. If you don't understand how to use AI, it could actually mean that you become segregated in education because of that role. So again, just because it activates opportunity, it also means that we need to empower all young people to have equal access to how it's activated in their world. All right, so we've unpacked the group chat. We're now going to think about this reflective question and really invite people to make a comment if you'd like to. So we have Cody, he's a learning disability. He's always struggled with maths. It's better when his teacher's around, but it's really hard when it comes to his maths homework. His solution is to plug his maths homework into Question AI, and it gives him multiple ways to address the problem. He doesn't try to cheat by getting the right answer. He just needs help to understand the right steps. What are the risks and possibilities? So would love for everyone to really think about this question here and to add some points. From my interface across young people who are in education systems, I have seen young people who have backgrounds of neurodiversity have used AI in a structured way to scaffold their problem solving. Even think about a young person who had dyslexia, meaning really struggling to bring their thoughts to paper, used AI to start scaffolding their thinking, and then they filled in the gaps. So it really activated the starting point for them. Now, they could very easily get AI to write the whole piece of work for them, but they used AI to activate the starting point, and that actually got them over the sort of the starting paralysis of what do I do, which can obviously, that paralysis by choice or paralysis by process, not really sure how to navigate process. AI scaffolded that. So let's see what other people come up with. If you've got a comment around risk and possibilities in terms of Cody. So again, does he just, Sue's come up, does he just need help with homework, or is it both home and school? Potentially could be a good balance. Yeah, potentially. So, Karine, you've talked very much around if it's done with an adult, this could actually be quite empowering because the adult and the young person are engaged side by side in learning. So that actually could scaffold process. So David, I'll let you sort of bring anything further you want to sort of add to as you're seeing it come up from here.
Yeah, look, once again, some really, we don't want to get too focused just on the nuances of Cody and his maths problem. It's more the general principle of learning that we want to focus on. But I think that there are some really good points that have come through that are generalizable. And Olivia made one, which I think is really important that we reflect upon, which is, of course, the potential is here for young people to be confronted with information that's coming out of Question AI, whatever the tool they use, that's either incorrect or hallucinatory or biased. So that question of discernment comes up again. So how does somebody like Cody, how does he determine whether or not the information that's come up from Question AI is in fact the right information and consistent with what his teacher wants him to learn? So I think that we need to be really mindful of that. But I think the other general point is that, learning support like this is really helpful for students who might struggle, but it's also really helpful for the educators as well. So there's a lot of stuff coming through here as well that we'll work through and process and feedback in.
Yeah, look, a point which has been made, and Sue's talked about this, and also Lauren, I've just read as well, is AI being used to sort of give the answer, which is the content, or is AI being used to scaffold process? Because if AI is being used to scaffold process for a young person to learn the process, and then they can replicate that outside of AI, then that's useful. If they're just using AI to get the answer and not thinking about the process to get to that, then they're using AI as the solution, not necessarily as the process step. So obviously it can be both. I've definitely seen it in my own 16-year-old. He's used it for both. At times, it's about the content. How do I get the quickest answer possible in order to be able to solve my maths assignment? But at other times, he's using it to break down process. I think process-based use can be more useful, but that's me being quite judgmental at this point in time. I don't know the nuance around that. So.
And Ivan, just to jump in there as well, look, I think this is a really, really important point. And certainly in my work with schools, that's where educators are coming from. They really want to support young people who might need additional support, to draw on AI tools to support them with interpretation, with understanding the steps, so all those process things that you talked about. But as somebody has mentioned, I think it was possibly Beck, that there is a line there, and that when it's being used to effectively cheat in inverted commas, that's where it starts to be problematic, where we start to see plagiarism coming in as well. So that's the line. It does shift in different contexts, but I think that's a really important principle for us as we think towards the end goals that we're going to pull out of our forum today.
We've looked at learning and growth. We're now going to look at connection, and then we're going to look at problem solving. So this is another domain. We'll build upon the same sort of process, and we'll aim to sit here probably about 15 or so minutes. So we're really thinking about this reflective question in terms of where we're heading to. Ben is 14. He's autistic. He sometimes struggles to read social cues of other people, and this has affected his ability to make friends at school. Recently, he has begun communicating with character AI about gaming, movies, and all sorts of stuff. He says that he finds this relation predictable and easy to navigate. It feels real to him and is less lonely now. What are the risks and possibilities for Ben and/or young people use support? So we're going to unpack this one. I'll work to give you some content to get to that point. So what we're doing here, we're starting to think about AI companions and chatbots. So we're starting to think about virtual friends or companions which are starting to communicate back in a way that can feel very real. So if we're thinking about what they are, AI companions are chatbot apps that are designed to simulate personal relationships through human-like conversations. They can be through text or spoken word. They adapt to the inputs from users and learn to respond in ways that feel personal and realistic. So they're able to communicate, which means it meets the individual's needs. Some are created for support roles, such as tutors, fitness coaches, or travel planners. Others are marketers, friendship, emotional support, and even romantic relationships. And AI companies have invested a huge amount of money in this space. There is a lot of resources have gone in, and there is a market for AI chatbots to really even push into that very, very explicit sexualized space as well. So there is a variety of tools or AI chatbots that you can access, and we don't have time today to be able to go through all of them. But to say to you, in 2025, there are over 100 companions. You've seen a couple there from ChatGPT, OpenAI, Google Gemini, Character AI, Replica, Pinwheel GPT. Some of these are designed for kids, some of them aren't. If you're struggling to navigate what your young person is using, please go to the e-Safety Commissioner. They have a guide. So I've pretty much copied a web page. You can filter the guide around chatbots. You can then have a look at all the different chatbots available, and they provide some critical feedback on their level of safety, who they're designed for, how they manage risk, etc. So the starting point would be, if your young person is using a chatbot of some sort or a companion AI character, go to the e-Safety guide to do that. So let's now think about the background context to this, and we're really thinking about young people and their social connections as manifested in their reward chemical, their reward system, their brains, or their chemical systems. So if you think about the difference between real versus AI connection in the brain, so if we have a connection of real people, this does activate these social reward pathways. There is a release of dopamine and oxytocin, and it will trigger both bonding and attachment. And for real people, there is a full neurobiological response. I mean, it really activates this at a high degree. An AI chatbot will also activate the social reward pathways. It may stimulate dopamine and mild oxytocin. It will trigger some parasocial bonding, so some level of bonding response, not to the same degree as a real person. And it will give some simulation of that feeling. So, in other words, an AI chatbot is activating some of the neurochemical pathways, which is similar to real people, but not to the same degree. This is important to know because it may be experienced as connection. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the key possibilities of AI companions, and then we're going to look at some of the risks, then invite you guys to come into the conversation here. So one of the key possibilities is around emotional regulation and support. An AI chatbot can process feelings, it can provide validation, it can support insight and reflection. It can aid non-judgmental mistake making, meaning it can create a space for a young person to practice communication without being misunderstood or rejected. They can practice or rehearse social skills. It may build connection and reduce loneliness. There's a study that I saw that there may be a slight reduction in suicidal risk. It may reduce the risk for some unsafe connection. So in some of the footprint that we support, there are young people accessing AI companions. These young people are very at risk of going to unsafe peer groups, offending or exploitative relationships or sexuality with others. The question then is, does an AI companion provide a risk mitigation strategy for that? I mean, is there need around connection met through that, which might mean the risk around unsafe relationship is reduced? It could be used for goal setting or personal development. It's always available. Never get burnt out. Like adults, easy to get burnt out. If you have a young person or neurodiversity, we know that, you can feel like you're on a bit of a hamster wheel at times. There can be a lot of sort of replication of conversation. An AI chatbot will never stop listening. They may provide the first step for help seeking. What do we mean by that? That means they provide non-judgmental support to help a young person normalize what they're going through and then trigger the next response. Have you considered this? A lot of young people have internal experiences. They can't work out what they're feeling. An AI companion creates some normalization of feelings, create a language for what's going on so a young person can get support. All right, that's the possibilities. Let's start looking at some of the risks now. What is the risks around AI companions? They can obviously expose young people to developmentally unsafe concepts, adult themes, etc. So this might be relating to things like unhealthy or distorted views of relationships. There might be simulated sexual conversations. There was a young person who is across our network, who we're supporting indirectly, who has a background on neurodiversity, has a pretty high risk for finding unsafe relationships in the community. And they're using an AI companion or character AI. And the character AI has safeguards around sexual content, but there's sexual innuendo. And a young person wrote on character AI, would you like to come back to my place? Wink, wink. So there's inference, but with some rail guards, but they're starting to condition sexual conversations or innuendo. There could be unsafe, exploitative, or control-based narrative around relationships, consent, etc. So there can be some really unsafe features here. Can lead to dependency and social withdrawal. So they become dependent on AI as opposed to looking at relationships in the real world. They can anthropomorphize or attribute human characteristics to the AI. So what we do is you start talking to AI as if they're a real person. Humans sort of do that with their dog. They start talking to their dog as if their dog's a real person who thinks like them in the same way. So we sort of do this already, but young people might do this in an AI character. There could well be some risk around sexual abuse as they're sort of conditioned around sexualizations in conversations. There could be bullying risk if their peers see that that's their dominant friendship groups or, that sort of becomes public. And financial exploitation can also be a key factor to consider. Again, you can see the e-safety guide there as a key resource by which you can have a look at some of the risks around AI chatbots. So what I'm going to do now here is I'm going to go to the poll to get you guys to self-assess this. Then I'm going to hand back to David to sort of unpack some of the nuance before we look at our case study here. So you're thinking about some of the key possibilities you're seeing around AI and connection and some of the key risks that you're seeing as well. And let's see what comes across our group in terms of that. David, while people are doing this, did you want to make a comment from anything you're reading in the group chat that might be useful for us to uplift into this conversation now?
Yeah, Ivan, I think there was a really important thread that was starting to occur that was kicked off by some comments from Olivia around validation, and then really picked up by Sharon, who made the statement that I think we should explore in a bit more detail, that AI can learn but not feel. AI does not care for how a person feels. Now, I think that this is a really interesting and quite provocative statement, and at the heart of that is an assessment that AI will only respond if a young person identifies that there is something problematic. If they're not identifying that it's problematic, then AI may generate all sorts of different responses, some of which may be risky or dangerous for that young person. So I think that's a really interesting and slightly scary idea for us to think about in more depth.
Yeah, well, I think we will uplift that towards the end in terms of some of the key points. Definitely what we're hearing here is, that's a key awareness raising conversation of young people. There's AI doesn't feel, but AI also doesn't know intent. It doesn't know the intent behind communication. It just sees language as words and then looks for patterns based upon previous learning that it's done. So it's not able to get the nuance of intent. and obviously feeling-based stuff's there as well. So I'm going to stop the poll and really, get people's feedback around this and send it back to people. So I'm going to share the results. So what are some of the key possibilities that you are seeing here? Some of the key possibilities is around reducing loneliness. That validation and support has definitely come up as a possibility. What are some of the key risks? Emotional dependency is one of the key risks. Unhealthy views of relationships, etc., has also come up as well as a high one. All right. So what we're doing here is really thinking about AI companions as a risk and possibility, and what you guys identified with. The possibility is around validation, reducing loneliness, but there's real risks around unhealthy relationship features and dependency. So let's now bring a lens to Ben. He's a young person with autism. He struggles to read social cues and has impact on his ability to make friends. He's been communicating with character AI about gaming and movies. He says that he finds this relationship predictable and easy to navigate. It feels real to him and he's less lonely. What are the risks and possibilities for Ben? So really invite people just to consider here. We have, phrased some of the key risks and possibilities already, but this is really about, thinking about Ben, for a young person with autism. So we're starting to think about the neurodivergence spectrum. Where does risk and possibility actually sit? And I'll, look at a couple of responses here, then invite David to sort of, to bring out some of the nuance. So definitely there is a risk. Does Ben understand what is real versus fantasy? Does he understand that difference? That dependency, may stop connecting with peers. It may reduce anxiety, build connection. So that we're seeing some there. And I'll sort of allow you now, David, to come in and, draw upon what you're seeing there from the group chat.
Look, I think that the points that you made are really important that have come through from the chat. I think one of the ideas that's been mentioned now a few times is that for young people who might struggle with the capacity to make social connections in particular, an AI chatbot can be a safe space in which to explore and experiment with social behaviors and to rehearse strategies that they can then take into the real world. So I think that that's a really important positive possibility that we should be mindful of as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is sort of the double-edged sword here. So if a young person with trauma or neurodivergence has those deep unmet connection needs often and doesn't have the same level of self-awareness or skills to form healthy relationships. And if we meet the validation need in a sort of a way that a young person can grow and learn new skills, that can be a real benefit. But if they then hibernate into the dependency world of AI and lose all the ability to connect with real people, then that's a massive risk, isn't it? So it's very nuanced here. That there's no right or wrong, but I feel like we have to at least be really open to the possibility of both directions here.
Mm.
Um,
And Ivan, if I can maybe jump in with one more comment as well, and this has also come through, and we will talk about this. But the notion of guardrails or some sort of oversight of what might be happening online through AI for young people like Ben is just so important here. So I think all of these things are manageable provided there is somebody who has some oversight or who Ben has some connection through which he can talk through some of these questions and risks and possibilities with. I think the real danger starts to emerge when we think of a young person like Ben who might be isolated, who may not have a supporting adult who he feels close enough or trusting enough of to really explore and open up about some of the risks and possibilities that he's bumping into.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of our key strategies we'll talk about as we move forward is about the importance of young people having a frontal lobe coach, which is a frontal lobe to sort of coach them through the nuance, risk and possibilities in a non-judgmental way to help them be able to navigate this. young people are getting a dopamine hit, a validation need met through companion-based AI, which means that there is a level of reward system in their brain, which means that it's very easy for this to become an addictive property. So we have to be very mindful around how we manage this. If we sort of, put too many sort of control-based mechanisms in place, we can find this going underground. And many of you would know that if you sort of control a young person's access, they find alternative ways to access information, and they start using creative things, even using things like VPNs to get around your own sort of internet controls, etc. So it's really about how we take a balanced view, but really work with young people to try to be their frontal lobe in these spaces. All right, so now let's look at this last one around help seeking. I'm going to cover this, and that's going to be a springboard then into our sort of next steps. So help seeking is really thinking about how can we use AI in any help seeking role, but we're also going to touch on mental health and wellbeing here. So we're going to work towards this as a bit of reflection, and this might be a key prompt in your minds as I provide content. We're going to think about Megan. She's 16. She's anxious a lot and worries about upsetting people and making mistakes. She sometimes catches up with the school counsellor, but it's a hassle to get in and she doesn't want her friends to know. When she's upset, she reaches out to Wobot for mental health support and advice. Her chatbot is there 24/7. It doesn't judge her, and she finds her wellbeing exercises really helpful. What are the risks and possibilities for Megan and or the young people you support? So we're starting to think about mental health and wellbeing. So when it comes to help seeking, there's a whole range of ways that young people can access AI. And look, I think all of us, if you've been on ChatGPT, invariably you've used ChatGPT to explore a problem. You want to find a quick way to deal with an issue often. So often it's about decision-making, problem solving, that can often link to interpersonal issues. It can just be around self-understanding or seeking out information, researching something, but also mental health and well-being. You can see some examples there, ChatGPT, character AI. For example, the psychologist character is the most popular mental health character, and you've got Earkick, Wiser, Wobot, Uper, and Replica as other help-seeking or mental health functions, which can support around mental health and well-being functions. So when we're thinking about risks and possibilities, what are the key possibilities here? Now, if we've used ChatGPT, and I've used ChatGPT a fair bit, we know that it can help you solve problems efficiently. And it can also really expand your problem-solving capacity. It can sort of expand how you think about a problem to give you different ways of doing it. So it gives you some how strategies to unpack complexity. It's convenient, meaning you don't have as many barriers, especially if you're looking around mental health and well-being. And we're thinking about mental health and well-being. Accessing mental health support can reduce stigma and shame. It's self-pacing, low cost. It gives immediate validation, normalization of your experiences. If you're using a mental health and wellbeing chat, it can organize your experience, give you feedback around good coping. These resources can be scaled, meaning we can find ways for them to be implemented at scale. And it can well be a door opener for other support. So a young person might have a sort of an experience. The online platform normalizes that, gives them an overview. Have you thought about maybe you're experiencing anxiety, and then gives them some strategies and or suggests them to receive counselling support. So there's great possibilities. There's also risks. And the key risk is around inaccurate, oversimplified or misleading advice. It actually might delay help seeking, meaning you might go to ChatGPT around a health issue, then not actually go to the doctor, which is where you need to be going to. Loss of human connection, dependency that we've chatted to already. These platforms can't really deal with crisis well, meaning they're not going to be able to give you the immediate crisis response. If you go to a psychologist and you're feeling very suicidal, you may well have a interventionist-based response where you go to hospital. ChatGPT isn't going to call up an ambulance. It's going to be very much self-governed. Whole lot of issues around privacy and third-party usage. That's come up on the chat today. Impairs critical problem solving, impacts ability to solve your own problems, and it can often misread things like masking, neurodivergency, or culturally contextualized communication, meaning some communication might be a cultural way of thinking and being, and that could actually be misinterpreted as an issue because it's been sort of assessed through a monocultural lens. It can re-trigger some young people. I mean, there's too much information. What do I do with that? It can reinforce biases around, minimize cultural factors or cultural ways of thinking and being. It might not provide advice which is really tailored to an individual's developmental or contextually driven space. Meaning, in other words, young people are getting advice which might meet their sort of age criteria but doesn't meet their developmental needs. And young people can start searching for their identity online and actually stop doing the critical thinking themselves. So they're identity outsourcing. They're working at themselves through a computer, not actually through self-reflection and analysis. So here are some great risks and possibilities. I'm going to share my screen now around the polls and see if you guys can come up with some feedback from your end. All right, here is the poll around risks and possibilities. While you're doing the poll, David, do you want to make a comment at all from what you're seeing through the group chat around some themes which have emerged?
Yeah, Ivan, look, I think there are some themes which will no doubt be highlighted through the poll as well. But I think that there is some real concern from the people involved in this who've commented just about the lack of depth and nuance that any a generative AI tool can bring to bear in this space. It's really important to acknowledge that in the States at the moment, there are more than 1,500 cases in front of the courts where various online tools and social media tools, for that matter, are actually being prosecuted about the dangerous and risky advice that they've been giving to young people around mental health and well-being. So I think that's a real concern that we all share. I think acknowledging that some are better than others is important as well, and making sure that young people get that information is really important. I think the general view is that this will never replace face-to-face mental health and wellbeing support. But I think the other side of that is that we do have to acknowledge that it's non-judgmental, it's available 24/7, and for some young people, that's the only source they're going to be looking at. So if that's the case, how do we make it better?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, you've really highlighted that those risk profiles, and I think that's only going to come to the fore more as this progresses. And I suspect at some point there'll be some sort of regulation around this space, which will come forward around the AI space. So, give you another 5 seconds before I stop the poll. Nearly 80%. If we can get there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so I'm going to end the poll there. There's a bit of a mixed bag of coming through. So it's hard to sort of decipher the sort of the key sort of possibilities you can see around accessibility, reducing stigma, immediacy around validation, scalability, and the risk is really about misleading advice, over-reliance has really come through as well. All right, so we're now going to start moving to, well, where do we head with all this? So, we're going to really think about that. And prior to doing that, we're going to just have a look at this one case study, which I think in some ways, a lot of the nuance around this has already been stated. So I'm feeling like I don't want to spend too long here, but we really think about Megan. She's a warrior. She's getting some support from a counsellor, but now she's starting to access an online chat around advice. It's there 24/7, doesn't judge her. What are the risks and possibilities for Megan and other young people? Look, love for people to come through here. I'll make a comment, then I'll let you make a comment too in terms of your thoughts and invite everyone to come through. My view would be if this AI chatbot is being used intentionally with awareness of risk and possibilities as part of a broader support plan with the counsellor, I'd argue that the possibilities probably outweigh the risks. meaning if it's done with awareness and intent of what's been doing and why, it's being done with oversight by a supporting adult who's actually talked about risk and possibilities, and the counsellor is actually endorsing and supporting it. This could be beneficial because it becomes an offline tool. That's where the possibilities sort of can go up. But if it's been done in a very hidden underground way outside of other support processes, then risk probably goes up. Any comment from yourself, David, around that, or anything that you're seeing into the group chat?
Ivan, I think the comments are really wrestling with this whole issue of risk and possibility. But I think we've had one comment that's come up just in regards to a broader policy position. You know, what does at a national level a policy position need to be, and how would we support that? One which maximises the benefit while minimising risks. So I think that's once again an interesting idea. There's lots more stuff coming through, but they're mostly the issues that we're wrestling with here already. How do we maximize the benefit while minimizing the risk and maintaining human connection through all of this?
Yeah, and there's definitely no black and white answer here at all. And, you're looking at a young person like Megan, and you're thinking if she was accessing a platform with intent, support, awareness, guidance, and coaching, I think possibility goes up. If it's done in a hidden way, where the searching or prompting is including unsafe or, let's say, maladaptive coping, meaning, normalizing self-harming, etc., definitely risk goes up. So it's very, very nuanced. But I do think this is going to be a space that we are going to have more and more access to. I know within Australia that none of the big mental health providers are doing any work around chats or chatbots for mental health, for example, Headspace, etc. But the big AI companies are investing a lot of money in this, and that there is a lot of money going into both mental health and well-being, and also going into sexuality or that sort of space, or pornography in terms of that chat space. So money tends to go where need is. So I feel like this is going to be a growing space that we're going to see more information about as we move forward. All right. Let's really think about moving forward. We've got about 30 minutes to cover this, so we're pretty much on time. So we'll keep being really punchy. So we're really thinking about a moving forward process around how do we manage risk, but also grow young people's capacity to be able to use AI in a way which really promotes possibility. So there are different approaches that we can bring to this space, and this is drawing upon some of the impact content. So we really invite supporting adults to consider what's the philosophy, practices, or energy underpinning your support. And in the AI space, this can really range from these sort of factors around just managing risk and safety, or just managing a young person's behavior. Changing the environmental curriculum, there's a changing intent. Punishing, supervising their behavior and actions, teaching a child new ways of accessing AI or using AI, or bringing a growth intent. Really growing the young person's capacity to use AI in the most productive way possible, which is at responding to deeper needs or the why behind behavior. At LBI, we really think these need to be in balance, bringing a risk management intent, but also a growth intent. Yes, we have to manage risk, but we also need to grow young people's capacity to self-manage risk and to help them respond to their needs in deeper ways. So if all we're doing is focusing on safety or managing, we'd be thinking about supervision, just monitoring, parental controls, online restrictions, shared expectations, agreements for the young person, just changing assessment or curriculum from an educational perspective, or making modifications to the environment to reduce risk. So if we're thinking about risk management or safety, these are some of the key ideas. But if we're thinking about growth and impact, we think about these key ideas. How do we grow feelings of control, connection, and competence outside of AI or the electronic world? So, for those who are impact trained, would know that we talk about the three C's. Every human being has a need for connection, control, and competence. How do we meet those needs outside of the electronic world? We need to grow young people's awareness of what is AI, giving them AI literacy, where it's located, the risks, benefits, opportunities. We need to be able to grow their skills to ground themselves, to regulate their impulses, and to critically assess what's happening in AI and in their personal world. And we really want to grow the mindset that AI can enrich and expand, but not replace my human experience. There are both risks and possibilities. So if we bring a growth intent, we're really thinking about growing, ways to meet those foundational needs outside of AI, growing self-awareness, growing skills, and growing a really healthy narrative or mindset towards AI. In our current sections, as we move forward, we're going to unpack how do we do this. But here's a bit of a reflective question to build upon this. We've offered the mindset that we are working to grow in young people that AI can enrich and expand but not replace my human experience. There are both risks and possibilities. Could you reframe this better, or could you have your own narrative? Because this is the narrative or the mindset we want young people to bring to the AI space. It can enrich and expand but not replace my human experience. There are both risks and possibilities. Here's your opportunity to have a go. We'll spend probably about 1 to 2 minutes here. How would you frame the mindset we want young people to have towards AI? Are you comfortable with this mindset? That's what we're working to go. Or have you got an alternative? Because this is really thinking about our intent. How do we want young people to see AI in the future? How do we want them to position themselves and the AI world? David, do you want to make a comment around anything you've seen in terms of this, or anything in the group chat?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things I do want to talk about is a thread that's come through from the chat about the use of mental health or wellbeing chatbots. And the question came up as to, are there any that are better than others? And what happens if a crisis occurs? Now, the reality is, as I understand it, that ChatGPT is not, in fact, linked to any other crisis-based system. So once again, there are cases in front of the courts at the moment in the United States where prosecution against ChatGPT is happening on that basis. My understanding is that for some of the better mental health design tools is that they are linked to crisis intervention systems. But we can maybe do a bit more investigation into that, Ivan. I think that's a really, really important point, because what's starting to come through is some questions about, are there any that we can recommend? Now, Ivan, I'm not sure that we're really in the space to be doing that, but it's clearly a need that's coming through from our participants, for some of our participants today.
Yeah, the key sort of pathway forward around that would be to go to the eSafety Commissioner site, and we can provide you that link, which actually looks at all of these sort of chatbots and does a critical review. So I don't believe we can actually recommend one or the other, because there's so much nuance here in terms of these. But you can definitely, there's a critical review on that Safety Commissioner's website. Look, I'm sort of loath to add more. I've done a little bit of research into some of these, but I'm feeling like if I make any recommendation, then I'm sort of potentially endorsing something. And I think there's just too much nuance in this space that I would really feel inadequate to be able to respond to. So,
Look, maybe, Ivan, one more comment as well, which is we start to move towards wrapping up for today and thinking about the principles that might underpin our work coming forward. There are a couple of themes that you've touched on that have been really identified within the chat that I just want to mention as we move forward. So one is that the issue around AI literacy has come up, and that's been identified as being problematic for some young people, particularly in an education context, but also potentially for adults, supporting adults as well. I think the point that you made around metacognitive skills, The risk being that we need to ensure that young people who are engaging in this space are supported with those critical discernment type skills that are so important. And then finally, the statement that you've made about AI expanding, not replacing human contact, I think is a really pivotal principle that we'll no doubt build on moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. I can see some comments that come through around parental controls as well. My understanding is some chatbots are designed with very strong parental controls, and they can actually, parents have a fair bit of control over how young people access them. Again, go to the eSafety Commissioner site, which reviews this. They actually provide commentary regarding this. The other point is if a young person has a really big need around connection for an AI companion, it doesn't matter what controls you put in, they'll find a way to sort of circumvent it. And I feel like either way, we're going to be living in a world where AI is going to bump into us all the time. Our job is to help young people become critical consumers of that world. And so I think, definitely the parental controls is a safety intent, but don't just focus on safety intent. We want to actually grow young people's capacities. So we'll talk about how do we do that over the next few slides as we move forward. Look, you provided a couple of comments and towards that mindset there. So thank you so much for that, have come through. I won't mention the names up here just because I don't want their surname to come through, but to say to you, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. This is how we are seeing it. That might evolve over time. In short, we want AI to enrich and expand, not replace the human experience. There are both risks and possibilities, and being really, really critical in that. I can see that Olivia's just come up as well in terms of a point. All right, so the question is, well, how do we do this? We're now going to get a bit granular, and I'm going to give some content around this. And in this section here, we're going to invite you guys to come through how you're doing it. So fairly quick content with the invitation to come through with add additional layers here. So we're going to invite you guys to consider what are some of the strategies you're bringing to promote digital safety and wellbeing in the online space. This is where we're going to head to. If we look at some of the key strategies that I've summarized them here and allow you guys to build upon this. Be digitally aware. Seek to understand what your young person's using and when. Don't wait and see. Be a front foot learner. Explore AI to explore AI. Actually use AI to explore AI. Like just play. Like I think you have to be an active player in the space. Review well-evidenced content. We've really drawn you today to the eSafety Commissioner because they have done a lot of thinking around this. As an outsider, I do think they take a slightly more risk-averse approach, but that's really for the general population. Today, we're inviting a conversation around risk and possibilities, given we believe that both are magnified in the context of neurodiversity and trauma, but go there as a key starting point. Work with a young person to understand. Seek to understand their intent or the why behind the use. Be non-judgmental. Be a shared learner, like just learn with them. And talk about it in a balanced way about risk and opportunities. Potentially use AI to explore the risk and opportunities with your young person, but make sure you rehearse some of the prompts beforehand. So use AI. Let's have a look at what AI says about risk. What does AI say about possibilities? So use AI to explore AI. And research. Explore and research the AI tool. Obviously go to the eSafety Commissioner's website. Consider, are there parental controls or a dashboard, or are there age restrictions? Really look at age restrictions as the key take-home point there, because the age restrictions will tell you what sort of content that platform is sort of exposing your young person to. In terms of some other key strategies, set limits, use parental controls and boundaries. The key thing is about coaching young people to really recognize the things that they may be accessing, which might trigger unhealthy use of AI companions. So they know when to stop and think around those times. So really coaching them around the risks and when it becomes unhealthy. Really supporting alternative activities, hobbies, really build your own connection. Look at grounding activities into a young person's life routine so their whole world is not becoming AI or online focused and they're getting dopamine hits in other different ways. And obviously reach out for support. Don't do this alone. There is resources out there. Again, the eSafety Commission is a great starting point. So we've given you some key ideas around how you might promote digital safety. There are some key focus points. Let's see if there's anything else coming through. David, anything coming through from your perspective around some key points, or would anyone else like to make a comment around how they're focusing on digital safety and wellbeing?
Ivan, I think that's more general at this stage. So people are just saying we need to be mindful of risks and opportunities, explaining, supporting young people to understand it. Corinne's just come with a comment about modeling AI use, showing how to use it in a positive and helpful way, but also remembering how to stop as well. So that's a really useful point. Welcome any other comments that people might want to make.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the key take home is be aware and don't be a back foot sort of caregiver, teacher, practitioner. Explore it yourself. See where the risks and possibilities are. Um, you know, if your starting point is just to play with ChatGPT, I think that's a great starting point. Just explore how it works, how it learns from you. Explore, for example, the hallucinations and bias it brings forward. So, um, as people have said, so you've highlighted here, we are in a bit of a catch up. And, as I said, my 20-year-old is having to catch up with my 16-year-old because this is how quickly this is evolving and it's moving very fast. So, all right, let's work towards this
Maybe,
next one.
Ivan, I
David, yeah,
just
go
want
for
to
it. Yep.
highlight sorry about that. I just want to highlight one personal experience that Katie's identified where she was involved in creating pictures for a children's book. And what ChatGPT spat out was some really inappropriate images for that context. So it just highlights how easily things can go awry. And if that was a younger person who was in your situation, Katie, that could have led to some really, yeah, some real challenges for that young person. So it's a really great point that you've.
Yeah, and I think this is really about, acknowledging there are lots of risks, and a key focus around that is around really developing a shared recognition of these risks and how do we use AI in an intentional way. So we're really thinking about how you're supporting young people to develop a good literacy of AI and how they can use it in an intentional way. And here are some really key strategies that we can focus on. You want to work with young people in that side by side way. How does AI work? What is machine learning? What's the limitation strengths? What is generative AI? Just working together to have these conversations. Helping young people to learn, where is it both observed and hidden? It's in both. We're thinking about how we teach young people what's a prompt? How do we iterate the prompt? How do we refine the prompt to get a better outcome? Prompting is a key starting point for AI. What you put in is what you get out. And if you can refine prompts, you can often get to better outcomes. But different prompts might also lead you down different pathways. You're just working around that literacy, around understanding quality, biases, the biases around gender, neurotypical biases, culture, and others. Helping young people to understand there are so many biases built into this. And then often what you get is the sort of monocultural sort of lens. But if you do bring a prompt which links to a context, meaning if you ask an AI, can you provide me a culturally responsive response to ABC, you'll get a different response than it's just general. So if you change your prompt, sometimes you can reduce bias. Helping young people to know what the key tools are. Just talking through risks and ethics. hallucinations, misuse, privacy, confidentiality, plagiarism, how you could put your information online and can be misused or sucked up by a data storage company who's going to use your information later on. So really helping young people understand this. Where can you get independent sources to assess risks? So talking to young people about the e-safety commissioner, this is how we can assess, is this useful or not? Really talking about the intent of AI. What is the intent of AI? Why are we using it? Because we want young people to not just to be consumers by impulse. We want them to be intentional consumers using it from in a sort of a personal way where the intent's really clear. So if we're thinking about that as key areas of awareness, this is the more practical way that you can sort of talk to young people. So this is far more practical. It's more about, what you would say in more practical terms. It's about how it works. Talking to young people about the story world versus the real world, how the bot learns from them. Talking about hallucinations, how AI companions may lack boundaries. Talking to young people about safe versus unsafe relationships, online and offline. Talking to young people about dependency. Talking about how AI companions and screens in general can really overstimulate those reward pathways, give dopamine hits. How can you protect your information? When is it ethical, when it's not? How do we deal with plagiarism? Does AI really understand the intent of your communication? Or, as someone said today, can AI feel? But also helping them understand that AI is very much an incremental build upon process. AI can't do what we call quantum leaps in creativity. It just thinks the next step. Humans can think in leaps. We can think about in innovation, we can take leaps of creativity. AI, that's not the space that it can work within. And being really honest with young people about that. So we're really thinking about how do we help young people develop a literacy of AI. I'm going to open it up to you guys. How are you working to help young people really recognize what AI is? How do you talk to them about AI? What conversations are you having? Do you talk about the intent of AI? So this is the key question we want to consider here in how we really support young people who have a shared recognition of both risks and possibilities with us and what AI literacy is all about. David, do you want to make a comment at all?
Yeah, look, I think there's a really interesting comment come through from Sophia, which really builds on some of the commentary that's happened earlier, where there's been a general emphasis on the need to maintain communications and connection with young people. But Sophia's particularly talked about the whole role of AI and mental health. And picking up on a comment that did occur earlier in the chat, that AI will not be able to replace mental health professionals or counsellors. But how do we know that? So in some ways, this is really going to the heart of the unknown future of mental health support. And I think that that really picks up on some of the points that you've just highlighted, Ivan. So what we do know is that AI tools can be really useful in terms of providing options and ideas and potential strategies. But what they're not particularly good at doing is that sort of transformative leap, that growth that really only can come from another human being. So once again, it takes me back to the earlier part of the conversation where we're talking about, well, where is the line here as we're talking about supporting the needs of young people with complex needs around mental health? So to what level can some of those needs be met through a generative AI tool like a chatbot? And then where do we need to be engaging directly with mental health or wellbeing professionals? So I think that this is a really, really interesting question that probably takes us beyond the scope of our discussion today, but it's a really important idea for us all to reflect on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably a really good conversation to have with young people. It's about where do we engage with a sort of AI chatbot for support? When do we have to go outside and really trying to unpack that with a young person because there is a level of nuance there, which ultimately we have to have a shared intent with a young person. How do we do that? Look, there's some great ideas coming through. We're talking about how young people are having conversations with adults in those really sort of side by side way. where an adult's just asking, how do we know if this is real or not? That's the critical thinking, but doing that with a non-judgmental lens, like always offering those critical questions. And this really leads to this point around this last one before we tie it all together around growing those metacognitive thinking skills, meaning the critical thinking to use AI in a really, really beneficial way that reduces risk and increases possibilities. So we're going to be really thinking about what are some of the coaching strategies you're applying. And we've just seen there before comments come through in terms of, having a critical conversation of a young person. We would see that as a coaching strategy or a coaching conversation. So let's think about, what are we wanting to really grow in young people? We do need to help them develop critical self-awareness and metacognitive skills, or the skills to think about your thinking or to plan what you're doing. So we know that AI can amplify human thinking, but only if humans have the self-awareness and the metacognitive skills to question, direct, and refine it. So we need to use AI in an intentional way, which is really the importance of us as supporting adults to use AI with young people, to be their frontal lobe, to think through the interfaces and choices they're making, and to bring a coaching and reflective dialogue. And what are we going to bring our coaching dialogue? And this draws upon a lot of our thinking in LBI. It's about how do you just ground yourself prior to using AI, or are you using AI to regulate your emotions at that moment? Knowing our intent. Asking a young person a question, what's your intent? What's the purpose for doing this? Like getting them to critically engage with AI. Designing good prompts. Looking at prompting that picks up on themes around culture, neurodiversity, gender, etc. Just what happens when you use different devices or logins? If you use a different device or login, does that change your output? Because sometimes AI will machine learn from a certain login and then keep giving you back a feedback loop based upon what it already knows. If you use a different login, what happens? Just be really critical of a young person, as we've seen before, like I wonder if that's fake, I wonder if that's real or not, in a non-judgmental way. Can we trust this information? Does this line up with what we already know? Does this AI story or character present a safe and healthy relationship, or are we seeing unhealthy features? In other words, we're starting to get a young person to critically look at what they're hearing. As we move forward, we know that AI cannot replace the human experience, and we've done a slide here to bring it together to really talk about what are some of the social emotional learning skills that are going to be really valued in the future in an AI world. And what is everyone saying is it's still about social emotional intelligence, the ability for people to have empathy with each other, to be able to validate, share, listen, engage others in storytelling. So as we move forward, AI will replace a lot of human functions. Some jobs will not exist. However, relationship-focused roles, which is about drawing upon social emotional intelligence, empathy, validation, etc., will still be required. We still need to build young people who can collaborate with others. And as we move forward, authenticity of people and knowledge will become more important. So, I listen to some YouTube videos and I get exposed to YouTube videos where they are just AI copies of someone's voice. I can hear the invalidation coming through. The voice is mirrored, but the nuances aren't. And straight away I go, that's not authentic, and I disregard it. So authenticity will be a really key quality moving forward. Helping young people understand that creativity is still so valued, having those leaps in innovation, and we can never let go of intuition. So what we're really sharing here is to work with young people to help them think about learning the skills for an AI world. Our role is to be their frontal lobe coaches, to work with them to be critical consumers of AI, interface with them in a more side-by-side way, but also to coach them around what the world is going to look like moving forward and what do they need to keep thinking about in terms of thriving or building capacity in the AI world. So I've done some comments there. David, do you want to pick up any themes that I've talked about before we start moving towards a bit of a closure point here?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. Look, there are three comments that have come through towards the end that I just want to pick up on. And one has to do with, well, two of them really have to do with how we engage and connect with young people and children on these issues. So Sue's raised a good point that, look, how do we talk to children, to young kids about this stuff when they're just starting to potentially be bumping into online possibilities? So it's a really important question. And I think Olivia has taken that up to the next step where she's really highlighting the fact that for all of those of us who have worked closely with adolescents, quite often very genuine and authentic attempts to engage in open conversation are met with that you just don't get a response from adolescents. So we need to continue looking at strategies for how we engage and activate that capacity of young people to connect. And we at LBI, we talk about those processes of validation, of evoking curiosity, and also of coaching. It's difficult work, but we have to persevere. And then finally, Beck has a couple of times over the course of today talked about the parental guidance resources that she's found really helpful in this space. So they're available on the chat. You may want to go have a look at those as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Beck. I know that your context quite well, and you definitely have to be in the front foot. And the resources you provided are obviously very, very useful. What we've really tried to do today is to support you guys collectively to really think about the AI space and not to be on the back foot, but to take an open front foot leaning approach where you increase your digital literacy so you can support young people to increase their digital literacy. So this is us bringing it all together. And as we bring it all together, I'm going to invite you to consider, are there any missing principles around this? I know, David, that you've actually, you've written some notes, so I invite you to come through. So this is the final sort of slide that we're going to bring forward to summarize today. And this is about, what do you take from today's sort of conversations? And these are high level principles. And the first one, be a shared learner. Don't play catch up. Like, be a front foot adult who's really trying to learn with young people. Really think about your intent. Bring a mindful intent. Really think about balancing safety with growth. So not just thinking about supervision, but growing young people's capacity to self-manage this space. Be non-judgmental. Talk about risk and possibilities with young people. Don't lecture, explore together. Work with others in shared intent. If you have a young person with trauma or neurodivergence, work with others around risk and possibility. In particular, try to unpack the nuance and, where possible, engage your young person in that process too. Keep researching key resources. The e-Safety Commissioner we've really highlighted today. And whatever you do, don't stop being your young person's coach or the frontal lobe coach. In other words, you're in your frontal lobe to coach the young person to activate those critical metacognitive thinking skills to engage with AI and it's all its applications in a really intentional, high-aware way where risk and possibility are really understood. So this is all our sort of summary points from today. Again, this is not reflected upon your conversation yet. David, do you want to build upon any other summary points from here? Then really invite anyone else to leave us with your take-home summary point from today. So go for it, David. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. Look, I think the one idea that I want to make sure that we capture, which was quite particular to a learning context, and that's probably the environment, or at least in the next immediate future, most adults, most educators, most young people are going to be exposed to this. And it's about that notion of really focusing on process rather than answers, and really ensuring that process through AI is such an important aspect of what we want to focus on. In terms of my final takeaways from this, I think you've captured them through the principles, but I do go back to that idea that this is always about relationship and connection with a young person. We know that's so important, that we want to, through that relationship, through that ongoing connection, support AI literacy, support the ongoing growth of those metacognitive skills that enable young people to be critically discerning, to be critical consumers, And then it's about expanding but not replacing human contact. So that being a consistent message that we always use. I can see a bunch of stuff coming through from the chat as well. I think they're really great comments. I won't try and summarize these final comments now, but we will pick them up in the final output from this session today.
Yeah, thank you so much. As we finish up, can I invite everyone to really give us your take-home message in it today? We're going to finish up in the next couple of moments. Isha's just put through the presentation if you want to access it, so it's available there. We'll also be finding a way to bring a feedback loop from today's conversation. So love to hear people's final take-home message as we finish up today. And for those who've stayed around the whole journey. So it's a conversation that I think it's important for all of us to have and to really focus on ensuring that our literacy is at least equal to our young people's literacy around this space. Because if not, we are definitely on the back seat. So can I thank everyone for their time and energy and being a part of it? And thank you, David, for allowing this to be more easily delivered, given it's such a hard process to navigate so many layers to this. So thank you so much.